Welcome to Mental Health Matters. My name is Barbara Myers. On this show, we're going to focus on the first onset of psychosis. And we're very pleased and honored to have with us two guests to explore this topic. First, I'll introduce Dr. Demian Rose. He's from the UC San Francisco Department of Psychiatry as a medical director, and he's director of the Program Assessment Research and Treatment Program, which looks at early psychosis, and he's going to be telling us about that. So welcome, Dr. Rose.
Thank you.
And next, I'm very honored to introduce Peggy Rahman. She is a person who has had mental illness in her family and is a family-to-family trainer of other families on what families go through. She's also a member of the Alameda County Mental Health Association Board of Directors, and she's vice chair of the Alameda County Family Coalition. And in addition to all of this, she's a mental health advocate for families and consumers. So I'm very delighted to have you too, Peggy. Welcome. I thought we'd start talking about first, what is psychosis? So I thought I would ask you, Dr. Rose, what is the definition that's used of psychosis?
Sure. It's a very good question because I think it's a word that has a lot of power, and I think by being careful about how you define it, I think you can diffuse it a bit. So first off, there's sort of the simple definition, which would be the sort of clinical diagnostic definition, and that would just be one of 4 symptoms. These are the 4 psychotic symptoms, and those would be delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking, or disorganized behavior. So those are a cluster of symptoms that sometimes go together in the same person, but don't always. I think sometimes it's a bit hard to think about what sort of hangs them all together. Sometimes people will talk about losing touch with reality. I think that's not a bad way of thinking about it. It's often true. But I think for me, I like to emphasize the fact that psychotic symptoms, like other types of psychiatric symptoms, so depression, anxiety, they're still on a continuum with sort of everyday experience. It's not that they're fundamentally different from other things. Certainly they're problematic. And so I prefer sort of thinking about them as errors in information processing. And the reason I think about them that way is it reminds me of the continuum of normal experience. And it also is a way, I think, that allows sort of us as researchers to sort of ask questions about it as a phenomenon, as opposed to sort of an all or none, you have it or you don't. So sorry, that was a little bit a long explanation, but that's how I would define psychosis.
So when does psychosis become a problem?
Sure. So good question, because psychosis, if you just looked at isolated psychotic symptoms, are actually quite common. They're actually quite common. So I would say it becomes a problem when it becomes persistent and intrusive and preoccupying, and in particular when the symptoms themselves make sort of normal functioning difficult. So it makes it difficult to concentrate or focus. It makes it difficult to maintain social relationships or maintain a job or something like that. Yeah.
I guess I was thinking of my own experience of psychosis that I had a number of years ago that for a short time met those characteristics, but over a longer period of time it wasn't long-term. And in fact, I thought there were some benefits that I got out of the whole process by the end, so I guess I can see both ways of looking at that.
Sure.
And Peggy, I know you work a lot with families and you have some of this in your own family. What do people in a family go through when one of their family members becomes psychotic?
Well, the first thing that happens is that the families are in shock. We don't know what's happening. Parents and siblings and people that are close to the family, we naturally feel responsible for what happened. We're confused, and it's horrible to watch our loved one go through what is apparently extremely painful. So we're sad, we're shocked. I'm really glad that things have changed, because the first time I experienced this as a family member, the psychiatrist blamed the family, blamed us. And it was, we lost faith in the system at that point. The second time I went through it, I was told that we were not at fault. But it's so easy for a parent and a sibling to feel at fault.
Yeah.
And we need training. We need support, and we need to be listened to.
So maybe some of the training that you do as a family trainer helps families to understand some of what they're going through, and the feelings are normal to feel that way, you know.
Yes, that's why I'm a trainer.
What mental disorders involve psychosis? I know that it's involved in a number of different disorders.
Sure. So there are a lot of different disorders that have a variety of presentations, and psychosis is one of the presentations. I think if we're talking about psychosis as sort of the persistent and frequent problem being sort of the major problem, then those disorders would be schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. Those would be the two disorders of chronic psychosis. And those are, and Peggy talking about your experiences as a family member. I mean, I think because those are disorders that tend to begin in adolescence or early adulthood, they tend to sort of affect parents and siblings very strongly, because it happens during the same years of life that people are individuating, that they're sort of struggling to make their own identity. And so I think that's what, if I was, when I'm talking about the disorders of chronic psychosis, that's one of the things I think that sets them apart from the other disorders that involve psychosis, is that they are these developmental disorders in the sense that they tend to begin in adolescence, and they tend to actually have a sort of slow onset over time.
How would you distinguish between sort of an acute episode that might be caused by a temporary situation like drug addiction or something from a psychosis that is a disorder?
Right, sure. That could become chronic or disabling.
Yeah.
Right? So first off, I mean, again, acute psychosis will be more common than chronic psychosis. So I just want to make that clear. And so what the question for the clinician really is sort of, when do I need to be worried? And so I think it's fair to say, I think most clinicians would agree with me, that the actual presentation, if somebody just came to you and said, this is what I'm suffering from, you would not be able to say, oh, that's drugs for sure, or oh, that's going to be schizophrenia for sure, right? What you would need is you would need to know some about what had been happening in that person's life up to that point, and also you'd probably want to follow them or closely monitor them. And so that's why, I mean, I think to me it's sort of a combination of two things in that setting. Is one, sort of don't panic. Right? Don't panic, right? Just remember sort of what sort of the data are and what you are looking for. And the second one would be that, I think it's a time that really demands close clinical attention and also family engagement, again, because this is often family members are very involved at this point in somebody's life.
I know your research is involved in looking at the early stages of psychosis. What is it that characterizes the early stages of psychosis from, say, a full-blown state?
Sure.
Chronic psychosis.
Yeah, a good question. And so, and like anything that develops over time, right? At some point, the distinction that at some point you're making a distinction that calls it a disorder or not. But it's not. I don't want us to think that it's as if all of a sudden something happened at that point, right? And so what we're sort of, how we sort of think about it is the continuum with normal experience, and what are worrisome signs in that sort of change in that continuum, or a change in normal experience, and what is the persistent preoccupying nature. So to answer your question about sort of what are the sort of worrisome signs, the worrisome signs would be changes in ability to focus or concentrate. In particular, it's often evidenced at schoolwork, because that's the age range that we're talking about. Although in young adulthood, it may be difficulty with work and things like that. And also, social withdrawal is a very common thing that you see. And so those would be sort of the two things that would sort of characterize the early stages of a later development of chronic psychosis. And then the kinds of specific things, the things that would be sort of, I guess, most acutely worrisome, would be thinking about the psychotic symptoms in what we would call an attenuated form, or a less clear form. And that usually requires a lot of attention to detail and interviewing and getting to know somebody. And they would involve sort of changes in subjective sense of self, difficulty, feeling as if your perspective or the way that you perceive the world has changed, but it's in a subjective way that's hard to put into words. And also, when I talked about sort of a change in information processing, often sort of subtle changes in information processing. So, I hear things differently than I used to, or I see things differently than I used to, or I hold on to ideas longer than I used to, even though I know they don't make sense, but I can't sort of get them out of my mind. That would be, I guess, maybe a sort of way to describe the combination of things that we look for. It's probably not going to be any one thing by itself.
I was just thinking of my own experience, and there are bits of everything that you said that I can remember that I went through at that time. Is there any early treatment that you can give to people to maybe head off a more serious psychosis?
I think that's a great question, right? And I think that's the kind of question that people are really just starting to ask. I think the field as a whole wasn't really focused on prevention and early intervention until maybe 10 years ago. And so I would say, the reason I'm bringing that up is I think a lot of these treatments are new, and some of them are promising, but they're not regularly available in the community. Certainly, though, I think family engagement and just contact with a psychiatrist and or a therapist who is invested in following this person over time and who won't panic, but at the same time will be very careful and will educate the family and the client involved. I think that certainly will make a big difference.
Yeah, have you found any of that to be true in families that you have worked with?
Yes, and when we're engaged, it makes a huge difference. When we're asked questions like, have you noticed these symptoms? What is your subjective view of what's going on? Yes, it has made a difference to family members. And terrible things happen when we're not asked the questions. You know, I've experienced family members that have had hospitalizations that have lasted longer than they needed to last. Yeah, we're a pretty good source of information to a clinician who is willing to listen to us.
That's refreshing that this change is happening. You know,
it's wonderful.
Yeah, I know.
And so I just want, I know I answered your question in a general way, but there are research studies that would suggest that, you know, you can certainly reduce the percentage of people who go on to have serious impairment by early psychotherapy, in particular psychotherapy that targets some of the symptoms in question. And so I think that to me just speaks even more importantly to just identifying them, not panicking, and coming to an agreement with the family and the client about, so what are the targets, what are we trying to change, how do we monitor progress, and how do we monitor improvement.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, is that part of the kind of therapy that works for these early stages? I
mean, it's certainly a type of therapy that has been studied and shown to work. And in this population, work is defined as, you know, of the people who get it, fewer of them have serious problems than of the people who don't get it. Because remember, if we're talking about the early population, they usually don't have huge problems. So what we're trying to do is prevent sort of mild to moderate problems from becoming worse.
How much evidence-based work or theoretical work has been done? Is it just a matter of the last 2 or 3 years, or is there a large body of work?
Good question. So I would say it's a moderate body of work. A lot of it's actually been done in other countries, Australia and England in particular, although there are certain other European groups that have worked on it. I would say it's really only been in the last 5 years that you've probably seen large-scale studies in American populations. So I would say it's still pretty new, and just, you know, I think we're still getting a handle on trying to be as specific as possible, right? Trying to be, and that's certainly an evolving field. So as that evolves, the treatment will probably evolve as well.
I have heard and read about some people who advocate going through psychosis without using any medication, and with, you know, some experiments of having special homes for people to be in without psychiatric medication. And I was wondering if you knew about that, or what you thought about that kind of treatment.
Sure. So I'll sort of maybe speak to that in two ways. One, I think I'm very encouraging of the idea that assessment and engagement is more important than medication early on, certainly. I think certainly, so I do believe, and I think if you look at some of the groups that have been doing this kind of research for a while, again, this is usually the Australian and the English groups, they will have formal recommendations that say, you know, try to minimize hospitalization and try to avoid medication in the first couple of days if you can. Just because it's not necessarily that medication can't be helpful, it's just that it can have potentially bad side effects, and you want to make sure what you're treating before you start to
make
use
sure they
the
really
medication.
need it.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I think of medication sort of as sort of one powerful tool in sort of the clinician's arsenal. Certainly, I probably think about it less than most people would in the population, most psychiatrists would. But I mean, it's been very well studied that for people whose symptoms persist for 6 months or more, that medication makes a big difference. So I guess I would be hesitant. My question would be, how long is the recommended period without medication? And in particular, there can be some symptoms that just having them can be dangerous. And so in that case, I probably would recommend medication at least in the short term, even if they didn't stay on it.
Yeah. Peggy, what did you go through first when a family member of yours was diagnosed with psychosis? You said you were in shock and you were blamed by doctors in some cases, and you know, it sounds like a pretty horrific experience for the family member to go through.
Yeah, and even when I wasn't, our family wasn't blamed, when I felt at fault, and other family members, siblings felt at fault, feel at fault.
Probably would help to have therapy for the family members as well as for the person.
Family therapy is very important.
Yeah.
I think another thing that we go through is denial. You know, oh, this isn't happening. It's not going to be real. It's not real. And we kind of hope even that it's drugs, you know, because if it's drugs, it goes away.
I think the clinicians hope that too, sometimes, honestly. Yeah.
That's kind of strange to hope that your kid is on drugs.
I know what you mean. It's an odd hope to have. But,
and we also have hope, you know, like we really hope that it'll get better. And the good news is that so many people recover, but you don't see that when you're in the middle of it. You don't see it. And then after that first stage, then you get to a stage where you're learning how to cope, and that's kind of a dangerous stage, because sometimes you'll be angry at the person that is ill, or resentful that they're you know that they're bothering you, or they're not getting better, or they're not pulling themselves up by the bootstraps. And then you figure out that, you know, it's not going to get better, and your grief starts again, and you just, this terrible sadness that family members have.
Could you describe the family-to-family program, which I know you're a trainer of?
It's a wonderful program. It takes 12 weeks.
It's sponsored by NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Yes. Yeah. And it's very in-depth. It helps families learn coping mechanisms, trains about the different mental illnesses. It teaches us how to communicate. It gives us some empathy lessons so that we understand psychosis. It's just a great program, and I strongly advocate that families, as soon as they're able to, go and get some kind of training like family to family.
Can you tell us what kind of interactions with the mental health care system that you've had that have been particularly helpful, and ones that have not been so helpful?
Okay. Helpful is when we're listened to.
When you're listened to, yeah.
Unhelpful is when we're not listened to. It's pretty that simple.
Oh, when you're blamed.
Blamed. I know that I've seen loved ones, and in my network of support, I have witnessed that when we're not listened to, the hospital stays are longer, and sometimes even traumatic, more traumatic than they need to be. So it's costly. Not listening to us can be costly to our loved one as well.
So it sounds like what you need from the system is a system that listens and that takes your input and as part of the treatment.
Oh, there's so many
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful clinicians out there
Yeah.
that have listened and have really been helpful to us.
Well, I know you've gone through some really difficult times, and I want to ask you, what is it that got you through, and what is it that gives you hope?
Well, knowing people that have recovered or are recovering, I have become close to people with very serious mental illness. And because of what they've gone through, they are more stable than those of us that haven't gone through it. You know, I have so much admiration for people who can go through psychosis and deep depression, and
Yes, I do too. Yeah. In many ways, they're my heroes and the models that I choose to emulate. What keeps you healthy?
well, I have a job that I enjoy.
Yeah.
I practice. I play the recorder, and I do music. I play the French horn and recorder and different things, so I enjoy that. I make sure there's time for myself every single day.
That's
I
good.
exercise as much as I can. Yeah.
That's good. That's some of the things on my list too to help to keep me healthy.
Yeah.
And what about your family? Are there things that you do as a family to keep your family functioning together? And I know there's a family resource center that's going to be starting up. And is there anything that you wanted to say about that? We will be doing a show just focusing on that at some later point, but I know you wanted to put in a plug for that.
Oh yeah, I really wanted to. It's going to be, there are going to be several satellite stations in Alameda County, including one in Fremont. And there will be family training and family support. So it's a work in progress, and I'm very proud to be on the ground floor for that.
Yeah.
To keep me posted.
Oh yeah, I'll put you on my email list.
And can you tell us some of the things you've done as a mental health advocate?
Well, the family-to-family training. People call me up if they, if you've referred people to me, and giving support. I've basically my work on the Mental Health Association and in the Family Coalition. When I'm not advocating for my loved ones, the biggest part of advocacy, I think, for a family member is to advocate for loved ones when they cannot advocate for themselves.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you both, what would you tell someone who, or either a family member or a person who first encounters serious psychosis? What would you tell them if there's someone watching that has that? What would you advise them?
I would advise them to go to a clinician that they trusted sooner rather than later, because I think that's your expertise, the early onset. Try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Okay.
And learn.
Yeah. And don't panic. I think that's what you said
I think
before.
don't panic. We even have that written down on some of our
good.
paperwork, because I think it's important. I think the word's been so misused in the past by including psychiatrists, been misused by, and so I think and sort of tucked under that sort of heading is just letting it's not you alone that
You're not
is suffering
alone.
from this, and it's not and you're not there are organizations and people to help you, right? People can understand what's going on, right? There are people who will understand. It's not just you, and that really the culture is really changing, right? Towards really thinking about prevention and cure as being the goal, and I think it's a much more optimistic culture among clinicians.
Well, thank you. What I'd like to do now is to talk to you, who are in the studio audience, and ask you a question. Do you know someone who is living with psychosis themselves or in their immediate family? And if so, I'd like for you to think about what we've learned in this show from Peggy and from Dr. Rose about psychosis, and see how, if you can understand what they're going through and maybe help them in their experience. And next I have some resources and organizations that might be helpful to you. First and foremost is NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. And their family-to-family program that Peggy is involved in. The Prodrome Assessment, Research, and Treatment, or PART program, which Dr. Rose is a medical researcher in at UCSF, is something that you might want to look into. There are some websites from schizophrenia.com, which is a nonprofit web community dedicated to giving high-quality information and support. There's also lots of information on the National Institutes of Mental Health website on schizophrenia. And finally, there's a program in San Francisco called Prevention and Recovery of Early Psychosis, or PrEP, that offers care to Bay Area residents who are suffering from the signs and symptoms of serious mental illness associated with psychosis. I would like to thank Demian and Peggy for their participation on this show. And in closing, what I'd like to say is, take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.